So, John, you have an upcoming lecture, Conflict Resolution, a Spiritual Approach. So, I had a couple of questions for you. So, for my first question is I have a family member whose views I just find totally objectionable and I really can't accept. How should I handle this situation when I have to be around this family member for family events and such?
Well, Alex, it's not today. Unfortunately, that's not an uncommon situation. And what I'm going to be talking about in the lecture is essentially we're going to be dealing with forgiveness. This is something which, in courses on conflict resolution, is recognized as something absolutely crucial. But there's different forms of forgiveness, and we're going to be dealing with a form which I think is essentially what Christ Jesus tries to describe in his Sermon on the Mount. And it is one in which there's a kind of mental redefinition. He talks about love your enemies. It's a command that he gives to his followers. But how do you define an enemy? And if you've already mentally identified an enemy, how can you love him? So those are some of the issues we're going to be dealing with.
Okay, but what if they say something when I'm there that's just totally crazy and obscene?
Well, this is not uncommon, and our tendency is when we're confronted with that, we react. And of course, what happens in that mental reaction is that we enter a context, a picture that we've defined mentally in terms of conflict, and we have the possibility of refusing to accept that definition. We have control. This is again one of the key elements in what Jesus is teaching, namely, we focus on thought, what is happening in consciousness. And this, it turns out, has everything to do with the subsequent behavior, our own behavior, but also the kind of reaction or response on the part of others that when we're dealing with.
Okay, so my last question is if I was a soldier, how should I view or handle conflict while overseas?
Well, this, I think, gets really right to the heart of the issue of conflict resolution, the spiritual approach. And that is, it boils down to a question of how can we learn to love? And I know that sounds a little contradictory in terms of what a soldier's responsibility is supposed to be, but again, it's the thought. It's the basic understanding of our relationship to God, to divine love itself, and the way in which we mentally define ourselves. And I'm going to be talking about a situation which involved that kind of conflict, and in which the power of divine love expressed through forgiveness was sufficient to resolve the conflict.